this is today's Guardian cartoon, which I thought was a good place to start, and then we'll work back in time from there. Just the good bits, the satirical good bits, not the political good bits, because there aren't any good ones of those. The first rule of cartooning, I think, is never draw what could be photographed. The House of Commons didn't actually look quite like this today. This is my satirical perspective on it. So I want to talk a little bit about what that means, like how the point of view from which a cartoon is drawn can make you question or rethink your point of view in the real world. Political cartoons don't contain their meaning. They rely on a shared frame of reference. If you haven't read the news, this image means nothing. But if you have, then I can call upon that existing knowledge and reconfigure it in my design. The power to twist information that is already in your head is what makes political cartoons so concise and insidious. This cartoon recalls something that we've all seen, Russell Brand on a stage. However, with a subtle slip of the hand, it also evokes the allegations against him of sexual assault. It then flips that familiar image to shine a light not on the stage, but on the audience, recast as the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil monkeys. Thus, the point of view from which it's drawn, the perspective, forces us to consider the society that not only let Brand's blatantly sexist humour slide, but put him on a pedestal for it. It says, look, you were there in the audience and you laughed. What does that make you? I think one of the most interesting things that a cartoon can do with perspective is to show two simultaneously. Verbal communication is linear, letters left to right, into words, into paragraphs, into chapters. But with an image, you can show like two things at the same time because you're struck by the whole composition simultaneously. Read horizontally, the top three panels here depict 3 New Year's resolutions in the lives of our multi-millionaire Prime Minister. And the bottom three depict those same resolutions in the lives of a single mother working for the public sector. Read vertically, the gap between the top and the bottom panels expose social inequality. And the irony of the gap between the haves and the have-nots correlating to the gap between those who make the rules and those who must live by them. Here's a gap between those who broke the rules and those who died by them. In forcing them together, the image holds them accountable to one another. As in the previous example, this cartoon about the COVID-19 inquiry also bridges two perspectives, but more subtly, not in separate panels, but nested one in the other using the screen. Given how much of politics is about drawing dividing lines, it's a very powerful tool to make people see two sides of an argument or a conflict. This cartoon was drawn for The Guardian on 8th October 2023, just after Hamas's attack on Israel, just before Israel's attack on Gaza. At the time, the left panel looked backwards and the right forwards. What had just happened to Israel, what I hoped would not happen to Gaza in response. It was an attempt to testify to the human suffering on both sides, in my eyes, equally innocent, equally needless. But sometimes, even the attempt to be even-handed can be fraught. When this was published, many people criticised the moral equivalence. How could I put murder, rape and kidnap on an even playing field with the military acting in self-defence? Now, given the thousands more children that have died in Gaza than in Israel, it could be criticised for quite a different reason, for a symmetry that has become numerically inaccurate and therefore politically charged, in a way that I never intended. Cartoons capture a moment. They can go off like sour milk. I think this cartoon has perhaps aged better. It was drawn 3 weeks after the previous one, during a weekend in which London was filled with protest marches, both pro-Israel and pro-Gaza. Again, the symmetry of the composition attempts to show two perspectives, both sides of a political division. But it goes further, I think, to suggest that those divisions are born of pain and preconceptions. Healing can come from bridging that gap, from seeing the other side clearly, as not that different from yourself. Given that I had only 4 hours to draw this, I drew one half and then digitally reflected it to make the other with some minor edits. In context, not a very politically correct technique, nor a very subtle one. The relationship between these two figures is strikingly neat, but also painfully reductive. Only very simple things are that perfectly symmetrical. Real life is far messier and far more complicated. Infinitely so. But imagine if, in all that infinite mess, you could zoom in on two windows in the same city, but at opposite ends of a spectrum of privilege. One of them in an elite skyscraper, and the other in the shadowy slums that cluster at its feet. Beyond these two windows are two very different rooms in which sleep two very different children, Ren and Finnick. This is the opening of my graphic novel, Interface. Set in a fictional city in a dystopian near future, it follows Ren and Finn in parallel, one drawn on the left-hand page and the other on the right, as they grow from children to adults, from strangers to lovers. We see both what sets them apart and how they learn to bridge that gap. Interface is a social satire about inequality, drawn from the topical themes that I've pitched to newspapers over the 6 years I've worked as a political cartoonist. It's also a romance about human connection, drawn from the 28 years that I've been alive. At least it will be all these things, hopefully, when I finished it. The process of which I'm now going to talk about with the lovely John O Farrell. John and I met whilst I was on a writing residency, as you said, at the London Library, and given your experience of writing satirical columns with Chicken Run and Splitting Image, I felt like we shared interests, but also that I had a lot to learn.
Well, I don't know if you... I looked at your work and I thought, wow, of course, as we probably all do in this room, and I was struck by I don't think genius is overstating it, Will. I think it's just some of the most magical drawing I've ever seen. And Ella explained to me that she was writing a graphic novel, and she'd never done any narrative long form before. And I thought about when we did the scripts for Chicken Run, and we sketched it out roughly, and we made loads of mistakes, and we had to start again, and we had to ditch that script and get another script. And I thought, Ella hasn't got time to do that. She is doing every frame as if she's animating the clay from scratch. Each of these frames takes so long that I was struck with a panic that she might go down a rabbit hole of narrative structure because she was just writing just ahead of where she was with each cartoon. She was just taking one step at a time, not with an overall sketched out plan. So I said, look, if you want to talk to me about narrative structure, I've written 6 novels and I've written films and things. I'll happily tell you what I think the pitfalls are, and you can pitch me your story, and I'll say to you whether I think you have got a good handle on it or not. And it might be useful for you just to pitch it to me and hear yourself say it out loud. So was that a fair assessment of how we started talking to each other?
And it was really helpful. I think when I started this, because I had so much experience drawing political cartoons, I thought I was going to draw lots of consecutive cartoons. And now I realise I had to write a book, and now I'm drawing it. I think people don't really realise that when you write text, you can edit it so easily. So if you were going to change a gender in a book with text, you add one letter. Whereas in a graphic novel, that's like 1,000 panels just drop out of existence and you have to do them all again. So as you say, it takes this like overarching perspective, and I think that thing about not wasting work, it's no point having drawn it like 3 months later realising that, the fridge should be that side, because that takes a lot of time.
So I saw the problems we'd had at Splitting Image at Chicken Run. I foresaw Ella maybe getting into that situation. I remember once going into when we were on the first Chicken Run film, which I also worked on. I didn't write it, but I did work on it. And I remember being taken into one of the studios. They'd have a big aircraft hangar out in Bristol, and behind all these black curtains, people were animating these little plasticine chickens. And we were taken in there as the writers, and this animator showed us what he'd been working on all week, and it was a whole week's work, and the chicken just went, like that. And that was his week's work, and he showed it to us, and I turned to my co-writer and went, we cut that about a week ago.
That hurts so much.
You can imagine, but I thought, and then I thought about my own novels, and my first draft of my first novel, I chucked out loads of stuff, and I remember reading it at Christmas going, this just doesn't work. And I was depressed until sort of the spring, and when I got it back up onto its feet, and you have to change so much. And I thought, Ella hasn't got time to do that. She's got to get it all lined up. And so I sat you down and said, what does your protagonist want? I said.
Clear questions like that. I think the thing is, like, that guy who animates that chicken could never have cut it himself, whereas I have to do that.
Yes.
That's the problem. So I think it's like I really worked out to like have different sides of myself working on different projects, because your comparison of film is like quite accurate in terms of you write. So you're a writer, but you're also like a set designer,
you're the
and a
lighting
costume
designer,
designer, lighting designer, all of that.
Yeah.
But you can't do all of those at the same time. So I sort of have days, as you say, where like think about the overarching narrative structure, and then stop thinking about that and just draw like that reflection on that eye or that chicken breed of that. Because you can't focus on making that moment like really like special if you're distracted by the whole thing. There's like too much information, and then when you do the whole thing, if you remember how much you love that one chicken, that you're never going to cut it even though you like actually need to. So it's that kind of like breaking up the structure. As you say, those big questions are really important, but not all the time.
And Ella is clearly a brilliant artist. That's a different skill to being a great storyteller. And when I was starting out in comedy writing, there were people who were brilliant punsmiths, there were brilliant sketch writers. Some of us graduated to half hours, and some of us graduated to 3-act structures like screenplays and novels. But the number of people who could do that fell away, and it's a different skill set. And there's no guarantee that somebody who can draw as well as this is also a brilliant storyteller. As it turns out, the story is fascinating and brilliant and has so many twists. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but even so, there's still a certain amount of getting stuck and taking wrong turnings that any experienced writer would normally do, which is why I was just very keen to make sure that Ella didn't waste her time and didn't have to say to her publishers at Virago, it's going to be 2028 now, So we met and she pitched it to me, and then we met again, at Wegley, and and I hope that was useful.
It was definitely useful. I think it's something I'm doing on my own list. Like I've got, with the political stuff I do, I've got editors and there's a dialogue, and this is like my project, so it's really helpful to have somewhere else to just be like, does this make sense outside my head, which is like a constant concern, I think, for everyone, but particularly on very long projects like this, where you see things how you want them to be, and you can never know how they look to other people. Like I have that when I'm doing fast deadlines. Like it's really important to check with someone else, because you're so convinced you know what it means. Then when it's in the paper, you're like, oh god, it doesn't look like that at all. But like you just can't judge you just can't judge your own work. And with something long like this, it's even more important to have someone else just to bounce it off, I guess.
Yes, there are film directors whose work I love the look of, and by the end of the hour and a half or 2 hours, I'm slightly bored of the story, and I slightly feel that they're being self-indulgent. And I think that a great graphic novelist, which I'm sure you're going to be, will have a story as compelling as your drawing, and that's the challenge, I suppose. Just to put it in context, the London Library Emerging Writers Programme takes 40 writers a year, gives them free membership, mentoring. They get into groups of screenwriters or poets or novelists or non-fiction writers. There's only one graphic novelist in your year, wasn't there? And so it's very hard for you. You couldn't sit around with 6 other graphic novelists and talk about the challenges and the problems you had. It's a tricky, lonely old business, I think, for you. And so I just wonder.
I feel like like a lot of art is collaborative as well. Like so many things, I'm so jealous of people that make films or musicals or like that have those like that dialogue. And I think it's like, but there's also something singularly cool about that, in that to have one person's vision is actually what you see with a graphic novel in like way more dimensions than you normally do, because it is just them. And I've always thought that the best graphic novels are like written and drawn by the same person, for the same reason that a cartoonist, like they commission a cartoonist they don't have someone else who writes the joke and comes up with a hook and then someone else draws it. You do both, because the idea has to be visual. So and that is extended across the whole book. It's like I wrote things I want to draw because I know that they're going to work as a drawing. It's quite hard to sell it to a publisher, because I was like, it's going to be really good when I draw. Actually, I know that, and I've like this is the point where I'm at the book now in terms of like I've got 350 pages of empty boxes, like it's like a table, like it's just all the panel blocking, and I've got like little writing or notes or the speech bubbles written in, so I know what's in all of them. Now I'm just like filling in the panels, but like that's quite hard for someone else to see and be like, this could be great, because it's like takes some time to get there, but you need to do that plan to make sure that I would get to that point.
But even again, I'm coming back to animation. But in animation, you would do what you call an animatronic. So you would have rough charcoal sketches of chickens done by different artists, and some took more trouble than others. Some of them were like stick chickens. But you'd just see pictures of the drawings with the voiceover on it. So you'd get maybe the real actors, or maybe you get cheaper actors to do the voiceover. So you'd hear the audio of the story, and you'd keep cutting to frames of the storytelling and sketches of the chickens in the farm, the chickens tunneling out, whatever they're doing, and you sit back at the end of that and going, it gets a bit bogged down in Act 2, or it's not a big enough twist at the end, and so your drawings and your panels have to do that in your head, and I'm full of admiration for how you can hold all that in your head at one go.
I think you don't, that's it. It's that thing I was saying before, is like, I think about it like, I know the whole overarching story. When I get to a double spread, I've got A and B, and I can do whatever I like in between as long as I get to those 2 points, because I know they'll click into the whole thing. It's like that, the consequences paper game where you fold and you draw the head and then you have the neck. If you leave the bits to the side, you can go wild, you can do whatever you like in the middle, as long as then it will make a figure. So it's that thing of like, I think about the overarching structure and then just think about this space.
So there's a lot of creativity happening in the moment for those panels that you don't know is going to happen yet.
Yeah. That's exciting.
It is. I have to say that novel writing is like that. You go, well, I know in this scene they're going to have a big argument, but you end up not knowing what the argument is or how it results, and sometimes it might take a turn that you don't quite expect.
And it's because of that thing of you can never keep as much texture in your mind as it takes to draw something. If I was to if we were to write about this conversation, we probably wouldn't mention our shoes, because they're probably not relevant to our interaction.
Oh, they're new shoes. They match my trousers. I actually thought about it.
But if I drew it, I would have to draw your shoes.
Yes.
Because if I didn't, you'd be not wearing shoes, and that would be weird, and that would have to have a narrative function.
Yes.
But if I was to draw your shoes, then I'd have to work out what shoes you'd be wearing, what would feed your character. And then I've thought about this whole new angle of your character that I would never normally have got to. So every time I'm drawing something, these are the journeys that you make. You're adding so much depth to that moment, because you have to, just to make it cohere as a space. We should talk a bit about settings and the architecture, because that's obviously relevant to the Soane's Museum. But every character has to have a background. So every person has to have its world, and that takes so much information, and that just creates depth to the story in a way that when my written out version of it never gets to those depths, but my drawn version does, and then that starts feeding in later. So I allow myself to change going forwards, because as I'm drawing them, I get closer to the characters and the spaces, and then that can feed in later, but it can't go backwards, because otherwise it would go around in circles.
Yes. So like I said, you're your own lighting designer, you're your own costume designer, you're your own set designer, you're every role in a movie you are occupying by doing this. You're the screenwriter as well, obviously, and the director.
And even the acting, I film and take photos of myself as references. It's really weird, but actually, you need to. So you are inhabiting your characters in almost method acting way. I do this for politicians as well, which is probably weirder. But you have to. If I'm trying to draw an expression, that expression will appear on my face. I've warned the people who work around me when I'm drawing. But you kind of have to sort of.
You act it.
Yeah. Because of the subtleties of real life, you have to kind of work them through in order to have the detail, I think.
So when you're drawing Boris Johnson, you're sitting there going, whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah, it is true. Even if you're writing fiction, I'm sitting there trying to feel sad in the sad moment and trying to put myself into that moment. So can I ask you, if you are the difference between writing this novel of these two characters, I imagine you grow to love as you go on a journey with them. When you sit down to write Sunak, you seem like a very nice person. And the criticism we always got on Spitting Image was that it was not a very kind programme. And do you find it difficult to be unkind to the politicians?
That's a good question. I think very wise cartoonist Martin Rosen told me right at the beginning that think about who you're punching. Always punch up, not down. So think about the target. And it depends on how the criticism lands. I feel anyone who seems arrogant and inflated then I don't have any problems with puncturing that.
Yeah.
But I would never pick on something that I thought was personal if it's something that they've decided to be in the public domain. So it's all fair then, I think.
Yes.
It can get depressing if everything is negative. If everyone you're drawing, you're like, I hate all these people. That's quite difficult.
Yes, I mean sometimes on Spitting Image, I'd think, is that fair what we've done to that person? You know, and then you'd meet them. That's the worst thing. And you know.
And then sometimes they ask you. They're like,
they ask you.
Like, oh,
yeah. So we did. I remember just doing a sketch with Gordon Brown and John Smith because there was a sketch. Actually, bizarrely, I wrote the original, Smith and Jones, when they used to do those head-to-heads. I used to write those for Smith and Jones. But then we did a parody of them with Smith and Brown, with John Smith and Gordon Brown sitting opposite each other in exactly the same way, asking these really stupid questions and giving really stupid answers. And Gordon Brown rang me up and he said, well, you think I'm really stupid then, John? You think I'm really stupid? And it's like, it's really embarrassing. I say, no, clearly you're not stupid, Gordon, but it's just a good parallel, you know. But and the difficulty for me was I've always been an activist in the Labour Party, and when Labour came to power, actually it's just when I stopped being a satirist by coincidence. I started to do a column in The Guardian. We'll talk about that because I was doing a column in The Guardian, and that's a very similar discipline to I think what you're doing. So tell me your process for delivering a cartoon on a Friday. What day is it?
Mostly it's
Monday.
This is a weird one. Mostly it's Sunday for Monday.
Sunday for Monday.
But yeah, it is. I think it's like it's an art and it's creative, but it's also a craft in the way that you do it in a very specific practice way, and it's why it's like people who've been doing it for years and years, they've really worked out how to do it. And I have like it's all about there's no time to really be creative because it's very like constrained. So it's genuinely like I'll like at night when the papers, I'll wait until tomorrow's papers have come out, so about midnight-ish, by that kind of thing, and I'll try and like have a think about what I think the story will be tomorrow. Because that's something interesting about topical stuff, is like when it comes out in the paper, it's now feels topical, but I've had to think about what that will be in advance, and particularly because of the print lag, like I have to think about what is going to be interesting tomorrow, not what's interesting today. And obviously you can't think, you're never going to predict the earthquake or those but there are, it's like political narratives, the way that a story develops. If you know the characters and the themes, because you've been following them for a while, you can predict the way that they'll turn. Like, for example, when I showed you at the beginning, like I knew that these votes were there will be a House of Commons votes about the Miranda policy. I knew enough about the characters to know how it would develop. And so those are those kind of ideas. And then so I'll do that. I shouldn't really do it at night because often I wake up the next morning and it'll all have changed, and I'll be like, it's a total waste of time. But I'm not quite confident enough to leave it. I think that's leaving it as a confidence thing, apparently.
Yeah. So you.
So sometimes I'll wake up and it's just like.
And are you given free rein by the Guardian to draw what you want?
Totally free. So in the morning I'll like have a little look, and then I'll pitch 3 ideas to the Guardian. Hopefully they'll take them. Sometimes I meant to pitch 3. Normally I pitch 1 that I want to draw, and if they hate it, I'll do another 2. But you try and actually control what they're going to choose, which is nice.
Right.
And if you give them too much choices, then they might pick the one that you hate.
Don't
actually,
give them that one.
Don't give them that one. Yeah. Even to flesh out all 3, because then it's like too late. So actually, I'll try and leave 1, and then it's like they tend to sign up about 10 a.m. and then you've got from there until 4 p.m. to finish it. But actually, it tends to sign off more like midday sometimes. Then it's between 6 and 4 hours. Right. And then the way I think about it is like doing an exam. I'm like time managing, like this much time for this, what's important, what's not, which bit can you like change if the news changes, because at the same time you're like listening for something might, and the order which I'll do things, that will affect how much flex I have at the end if the news develops.
And the good thing is you're the only political cartoonist that day.
Yes, not competing.
And it's exactly the same time frame I used to have when I did my... For 5 years I did a topical column on The Guardian, and it was 10 in the morning, you'd have that phone conversation with a comment editor, and you'd go, I want to do this story, and they go, oh, what's your angle? I would say it, and then they go, off you go, can we have it by 3:30, 4 o'clock?
Off you go.
Yeah, and it was like 4 o'clock. But I was competing with Will Hutton, Polly Toynbee, Marina Hyde had just started then.
So all of yours were published that day?
Yes, and so I'd say I want to do this story about the benefits. Oh, Polly is very much social policy. And I go, well, this story, Will Hutton is doing that economic story. And then one day, John Prescott punched a voter. And I said, I do the comedy, everyone else back off. This is me. Punching voters is the comedy department. But again, it was like 4 o'clock. And sometimes I would get rung up by David Lee, who was a commentator back then, who would say, "Oh, your cloned ox you're doing a story about, he's just died." Oh, no, he goes, "He's an ex-ox." Oh, well, that's great, I'll call him an ex-ox. That's but so it did change the angle of the thing about this experiment.
It kind of makes it exciting, I think.
Yeah,
the fact
terrifying.
that it's terrifying. The fact that it's live, like I think it's, and that idea that like what we're working with feeds into what really happens, because people will see, they'll read the news at the same time as seeing your angle on it. So you have you're playing into the stories in a way that you feed it. There's a kind of like give and take feedback about it, which is quite.
You're feeding the national conversation in a way.
Hopefully.
And do you have in Spinning Image? Sometimes I was there when Thatcher went and Major turned up. And we didn't know quite how to portray. He'd come from nowhere, John Major, and we didn't quite know what angle to get on him. And the first couple of weeks we had this robot controlled by Thatcher, which was like worked for a while, but wasn't particularly something that would stick. And then at The Guardian, they did him with his underpants on the outside, of course. Who was that?
Steve Bell.
Steve Bell, of course, did that, yes. But I said to the producer, do we have the technology to have everyone else in colour but him in black and white? And he went, I said, "So he's permanently grey?" And he said, "Well, that's a one sketch idea, John." And then he just pitched it to the puppeteers, and they just painted him grey, put him in a grey suit, and it looked fantastic. And it's one of those really obvious things. Oh, grey John Major. But until we tried it and put it up on the screen, it didn't. Then we just went, yeah, it looks great. And then I had the idea of him always eating peas for some reason, because it was a really boring vegetable. And so, and we just had him and Norma eating peas like from 84 Charing Cross Road. Nice peas, Norma. They're delicious, aren't they? And it really landed. And you never know when you start doing caricatures.
I think I'm not that worried about Sunak. I'm really worried about what I do with Keir Starmer, because he's incredibly boring.
Right.
It's like really nothing to. There's no hook. I'm like, I don't understand which bit I exaggerate or like how I. There's nothing. Every time I try and play something up too much, he stops looking like him. So it's like really, really quite difficult.
He's got a quite surprised look in his face, isn't he?
Yeah,
like
there's a time
alarmed.
it's like he's shot, and there's something obsessive about the way cartoonists look at people as well.
Yes.
Like I know like the angle of Theresa May's teeth, like that kind of that I'll never forget. It's sort of, so you kind of get close to them in this strange way. But I feel like with Boris, I inherited Boris,
right,
because when I started working, he'd already been caricatured by so many people that I was caricaturing their caricatures.
He also comes pre-satirical.
Yeah, he did it himself. That was much better.
Yeah.
You can draw you could just do like a yellow graph and know that's Boris, and that's quite fun to play with. Then I felt like Rishi Sunak, that was quite interesting because I could define that a little bit, because no one quite knew what to do with him.
Yeah.
And now no one quite knows what to do with Keir Starmer, but that's not awful.
Well, I do remember, before I was working on Spitting Image, that Geoffrey Howe was a fantastically boring politician. And they just had this, I don't know who came up with this script or even but they just had him coming to Margaret Thatcher with this little Swiss chateau thing, this little Swiss cottage. He goes, "Margaret, if you press the chimney, you get different views through the windows." And all these sheep started yawning. And they were just stoop around yawning. It was hysterical. It was so funny because it's very hard to make boring funny. It's boring. If you put satire is boring, it's sometimes just quite boring. And so to make Starmer, you go, "Oh, that's brilliant." I just don't think we've got enough of him yet, and I think it'll come.
Hopefully. Or even sooner. The thing that annoys me about Rishi is he's so small, and actually you want your main character to be like big, and to fill the space. So I'm like, he's always just there, like, and I'm like, I need him to like be bigger visually, just for. Isn't like a lot of people pick that as his like that's the way we caricature him, but it doesn't like really create emphasis. Yes,
well, when we were before my time at Spitting Image, they had David Steele as a very small puppet in the pocket of David Owen, the other half of the alliance. And after that election, '87, David Steele really asserted himself as the stronger half in the merged party, and they ended up splitting. And I'd like to think that Spitting Image had a little bit to do with how determined David Steele was to demonstrate that he played second fiddle to no one, as he put it. So you don't mind being tough or mean to pompous politicians. Other things you feel like I don't have anything to say about that, or I don't want to be funny about. I mean, Gaza is a good example.
I think it's a good example.
At Spitting Image, sometimes we just go, well, we're not going to do anything about the Hillsborough disaster, or we're not going to do anything about the tube crash. It's just, do you want to do the
You
sad,
probably
worthy
have
sort of?
more choice about what story
Yeah.
you pick. If I'm booked for that, when I was booked on October the 9th, if I hadn't covered that story, that would be the choice. Like, that would seem like a choice. It's not really my choice what I cover.
I suppose you don't.
So you have to be able to confront what you're given almost. And I personally do really believe that cartoons can do more than satire.
Right.
Like, they don't have to be angry or funny or rude or crude. I think there are different. You can do very poignant or pointed and strong and political, but not necessarily just to make people laugh.
Yeah.
And I guess the other point is who's remembering that this stuff isn't just. It's not just for you.
Right.
I feel I realise this when people write to me after, that what I think is my inspiration is actually people's lives, and I think it's really important to remember that. I don't always reply to everyone who writes to me, but I think it's really important to read these things, because I think this was the case with Israel and Gaza, where I was there's no way that there's nothing I'm going to draw which isn't going to upset somebody or make somebody really happy, not happy, but feel they've been that this should be covered. And
people would be very angry towards
very,
it.
very angry. But also, it was the emails I get were just they would be back to back, this blew me away. I really want to buy a pen. Thank you for doing this. And also, my family were blown up by it. This is just an example. This kind of split, and you sort of. It's just really important always to remember that what you think is funny and clever and is just what is actually real.
Yeah.
And particularly because what we're working on is live, it's what I was trying to talk about before about things twisting away from you. These things affect the real world as well. And I think it's about almost responsibility and just that sensitivity about the fact that other people have a right to these stories that you might not, that they might actually know more, and just to listen.
I suppose the political cartoon, it asks you to crystallise something, so it doesn't have to be a joke. It can be a thought.
It's a good way of saying it. The kind of zooming out, the condensed. We talk about sometimes just the twist.
Yeah.
It's the idea that it's what's real, but just for that term, it means that it's familiar enough that you recognise it, but not that takes you a little bit away from it, such that you reflect on the difference. It's just almost uncanny, just a little bit off, or almost more true than itself. The idea of drawing a really good caricature is doesn't look like the real person, like a photograph, but it gets their essence. So it's the kind of just a little bit, but you recognise them essentially because it's just a little off.
So I would never write a serious column in the Guardian. I mean, remember when 9/11 happened, and it was the Tory party leadership that same week, and Ian Duncan Smith, disastrous leadership of the Tory party, got off the worst possible start because he was elected on something like the 12th of September 2001. But I said, look, I'll write a column about that. And I wrote the column, and it was a perfectly decent column, but they just said, we're not putting any comedy in the paper at all, not even on that bit of the paper, because these towers had come down, this terrible tragedy had happened, and it was not appropriate, I suppose, to have a comic piece about the Tory leadership.
It's interesting that I did it. That comment. I don't know if I agree with that.
Well,
I think people need to laugh. Irrespective.
It's just opposite. Lots of pieces about the pictures of people who died in the towers, and here's John O Farrell being facetious about William Hague and Ian Duncan Smith. Maybe it just isn't the right tone.
So you think sometimes there's no
time not to laugh. I mean, we used to, before I wrote on Spitting Image, I don't know if anyone this here is old enough or will remember a Radio 4 satire show called Weekending. Now, we used to do a similar thing, political sketches about all the week's news, but that, for some reason, that always covered the serious stories as well. So if there was the King's Cross train fire, we had a bloke who did a poem, and it was like, Call Richard, and it was like, and then you'd be in the middle of all these silly sketches, and then you go, and then the train came into the, it's like, oh no, it's a serious poem about the disaster. And I would have just not done it myself, but it seemed to be this sort of convention in this satire program that we had to deal with, the Bradford fire, or all these awful things that happened in the late 80s, and every week there was a bloody poem about them, and it's like, I don't think that helps particularly. I don't think that's a satisfying way of dealing with it.
Some things you shouldn't, there's no place for humour, but some awful things there really is a place for humour. If you think about all the politics over the last few years, it's been great for cartoonists and stuff. Oh, God. And I think people, we talked about this before, the idea that laughter is a release, and that's action in itself sometimes, that like if you don't have any power to actually influence what really happens, it's almost like soothing.
Yeah, well, I've got this theory. I did this piece for Newsnight. I've got this theory that satire actually helps the establishment. So we've got this idea that satire brings down governments, and satire, is what think about the satires of the 1930s Germany in the Weimar Republic that did so much to stop the rise of Hitler. In this country, we sort of build up satire as this important part of freedom of speech. But I've got this theory that it sort of is the opposite. It's a release, and you're angry at the government, and then you are able to laugh at the government, and you feel a slight superiority. But that anger has been channeled into laughter, and it's a sort of release valve in a way, comedy. And I talked to my dad about the 30s, and I said, what did you think about Oswald Mosley? And we thought he was hilarious. We thought he was a buffoon, and we laughed at him. And that's maybe why he, never got very far in this country. Whereas they didn't really laugh about Hitler and Mussolini in Germany. And I don't know, maybe there's a different approach to their politicians. I don't know.
Makes us worrying to think that we're actually helping rather than
I don't know. But I think it's quite good not to. I mean, my theory, I suppose, is that we don't go out and set fire to public buildings and start revolutions because we're having a chuckle at cartoons in the garden. I wouldn't say it's that, but the fact that we are able to process our anger in a slightly more positive way, I think is probably a good thing.
A positive thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. When I talk to some of my older colleagues who've been doing this for a long time, I think they have a very different attitude to the job and to satire than maybe I do.
Yeah.
I think when they started working with their era, everything, Britain was great, everything was great, and then their job was to cut down, to bring back to the basics, everything crawls from the dirt and creates dirt and all of that. Whereas now, I think we all think that everything is actually broken, in the real, and everything isn't. And then I sometimes feel like I have more of a responsibility to uplift, or to not in just to show that there's still light or humour, or a bit like the one I showed you, the COVID inquiry one with that the widow. The idea that that's an awful situation, but you want to show people with dignity as well.
Yes.
So I think it's almost like if we twist, we need to twist away from what's really there. So if everything now feels like it's down, maybe we twist up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I don't know if it's a Swiftian quote, but it's satire is a mirror in which we see, a distorting mirror in which we see ourselves more clearly. And I suppose that's what you're doing, really. You're sort of distorting it, and you're going, yes, that's it. And there are times with on Spitting Image where you go, yes, they've got him, we've really got that character. And so there are times when we try to satirise people. I wrote sketch after sketch about Paddy Ashdown, trying to pin down the Liberal leader. He always had this rather annoying holier-than-thou manner. And well, the other two parties will bicker about this. And even the Liberals, we don't do this bicker. They're both as bad as each other. I tried to do this thing where he put a halo, he built a self-made halo over his head. And Jeremy Paxman was going, you put that halo on yourself. Well, let's not bicker like the other two parties about who made this halo, these angel wings. Who put them? And thank you for laughing, because it never made it as a sketch. It just didn't quite fly. And sometimes you've got the combination, and you talk about working on your own. We would have a combination of a voice person, the clay makers who would do the original models of the faces, and then the latex puppet was made and they were dressed. And somewhere in that chain, sometimes the voice person doesn't get it quite right, or the cartoonist hasn't got the face quite right. So it's a very collaborative thing. So sometimes, a puppet would work and a character would work, and then sometimes it wouldn't. Whereas with you know exactly what you're trying to communicate, and so that's. But it's more on you.
It doesn't really always work.
No. Yeah.
I think, and that thing I said before about it might make sense to me, but it might not make sense to other people, and you just have to really watch your preconceptions with that. And then I think it's that thing of normally you create something, and then you'd put it down, go for a walk, have a cup of tea, have a chat, come back the next morning and be like, oh yeah, it actually doesn't look quite like that. But by the time I've done that, it's already in the paper. So there's something really dangerous about the fact that the whole thing is spat out in one, it's one movement, and you just really can't judge your own work clearly by the end of it. And you just have to,
trust yourself.
There's fear in that, I think.
Well, but
because it's not just
as well.
That too, but definitely, you have to work well under pressure if you want to do this for sure. But it's that idea of both what do I want to say, but have I said what I meant to say? because if you haven't, then no one's going to care that you didn't mean it. Like,
Yeah.
that's what's really the way no one's going to, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, you still put your name under it,
Yeah.
even though you did it like in that and then it was gone.
But I mean, if you end up giving it at 4:30 or 5, you know, and that's how long it takes you to get it right, no one is going to go, wasn't sure about Alice's cartoon, but at least you got it at 3:30, you know, so you
But I'm always at 4:30, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, so I felt that same about books. If your book ends up taking you longer, it's going to be forever. You've got to be so happy with it, and it's got to be so perfect.
I think the thing you said about adrenaline, that's definitely true. One thing I've realised, which is really feeding into the book now, is like there's a confidence about working under a deadline where you don't undercut yourself. Like it's actually I'll show you like one example because I think it's like quite interesting about like the intersection between the two. Let me find it. So it's not this book. So this one. This is a cartoon I did about Dominic Raab. I did about like in a china shop. I had 7 minutes to do the china shop, which was not enough time. Like had just not enough time, and it needed the china shop for the dope to work. So in this like moment, I was like, okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make it like black and then draw the like lines of the plates as white lines. And it's like that idea of like what is essence of plates that can be executed in the minimal amount of time. And it was that, and normally like when I'm drawing, I'm like, what I was saying before about all these things that feed into it, but that was actually just like be confident about it. And that is really starting to feed into the book now. So I did this page literally the same, like the day after, like I was working like that. And you see how like the way the dancing crowd is working is like just these like curved, like cutting lines. And that was this, it was like that feeling of like, don't draw more than you need to, and particularly with graphic novel when you actually, sometimes it's about getting it quickly, but also you're telling a story, so I don't want to pause there, I want to like communicate that movement. And I think it's like, I'm noticing this like, this movement across between now, like the deadlines are forcing me to work out how I do things, not like what's right, because there is no right, but like what's my way, and that's like style, right? And then that's what I'm now having time to actually like work through in the book.
I think you've earned that frame because your other frames are so detailed and so much in them that you're allowed. I think it's interesting to contrast that with sometimes the double spreads where the stories go across and you've got these intricate stairways and these little windows and cats you only spot the fourth time
and it's
you've
like
looked at it.
pause sometimes you want it. We talked about that as like pacing sometimes.
Yes.
Like in a graphic novel it's like I control the pace by how long I want you to spend on each thing. And those big panels I'm like just like stop and have that. And then others is like feed the story.
And that is again like filmmaking. Your own editor. So and a good editor will go, this montage can be, you can lose a minute from this montage, or this montage can be a bit longer, or whatever. You're making those decisions as well as you go along, which is incredible pressure, really. And amazing if you can feel it.
If it works.
Tell us about this one.
I moved on to the point. I think this is interesting in terms of like time and space in one. Like you see like his part in the shadow, and that's like is that the comic is time and space, right?
Yes.
It's like telling us what in space, and those you only have one panel, but you want to do that thing I was talking about before about putting two moments together to make an argument or a narrative. I'm enjoying news now that I feel like I was part of it happening, if that makes sense.
Right.
So like this story about COVID, like I remember that story happening. So then when I get to that bit of the news that feels relevant to it, I can feed back.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And again, you've got Johnson, a pleasure to draw. I mean, I remember when I, not pleasure to draw, but an easy caricature to have fun with. There was a point at which, Tony Blair came in and all the anger sort of went out of politics, and it was harder to do satire because people were sort of feeling pretty good about the government. For about 2 or 3 years, right up to Iraq really, people felt pretty good about the British government, and we get slightly cross about small things, and we'd have a laugh at John Prescott and maybe Peter Mandelson, but people weren't mad with the government, and that's made it. So I found myself satirising around the edge, especially as someone who voted for them and campaigned for them. It was weird. It's a bit much for me to be going. And then I got rung up by Tony Blair's office and said, "Would you like to be on the Labour National Executive? We think you'd win if you stood as because I've written this book about the Labour Party." And I went, I don't think that's really appropriate. I'm writing a satirical column in the Guardian every week, and you're saying, and I'm on the governing executive of the party in power. That's a real weird sort of Satire sort of insider, have your cake and eat it like Boris Johnson, really. So I did say no to that. But do you ever worry that you might let your preferences affect your cartooning? I imagine you're not a supporter of the Rishi Sunak government.
They definitely affect my drawing. I think exactly. I don't think I could work for a paper that controlled my political views in a way that I didn't agree with.
Right.
I actually don't think I'd be capable. Like, I can't help being emotional about how I draw, and there's like the stories that I really care about are the ones that I always end up drawing better about.
Yeah.
So
a journalist who really wanted Labour to get elected finds a bit of dirt on Keir Starmer the night before election. Does he publish or doesn't he publish? You had the power to turn people off Keir Starmer before the election. Would you feel that is something that I've got a brilliant idea for a way, and you think this is the truth, but it might affect the re-election of Rishi Sunak? What would you do in that situation?
Not if I was drawing that for the Times, but if I think, because I do work for both papers, I have a very slightly different attitude to them. Like, I know that when I work for the Guardian, everyone agrees with me already. Right. They're all going to vote Labour. Right. If I had that spot in the Times before the election, right, I'd be less likely to draw a critical Starmer cartoon, probably.
Because on Spitting Image we got given an election special the night before the 1992 election. Now, it had always been, the election special in 87 had been a moment polls closed on election day, but they gave us one the night before, and we had people in from the ITV checking that the sketches were the same length. And it was like, so we had to have exactly the right, and then sort of half the length for Liberals, weirdly. So, and it was like, you're 10 seconds under on a Liberal Democrat sketch, and so we had to write another Liberal Democrat quickie. But we did this sketch, we did all these sketches, we were all on the left, and most of them were to the left of me, to be honest. And we did all these sketches attacking the Tories' policies and their record, right up to 92. And then with the Labour puppets, we took the piss out of them as people. And we had Kinnock looking like a right buffoon, we said, losing this election is as hard as falling off a log. And he kept trying to fall off this log and he couldn't do it. And it was a much funnier sketch. And the other ones were a bit angry and cross. But anyway, as history records that the Tories won that election against all the expectations. The Telegraph did a piece saying Spitting Image had helped the Tories win that election. And I was like, no, this is not what I meant at all. And then when Thatcher came to be losing power, I wrote this sketch. She was going through to the second round of votes, and you thought, she's going to lose this second round. And I did this sketch after the credits had finished of just her going through a shadowy House of Commons. And you just had the echoes of her former speeches going, no, the lady's not for turning. I will go on and on. And then she just sobbed quietly in the corner. And that was the end. Central logo. And 2 Tory MPs said that they voted for her because of that. They were so moved by her. They were going to vote against her. They voted for her. And so she was assisted by this bloody sketch I've written.
I think sometimes like comedy can humanise people.
Yes,
like, I think Starmer would do well to give us something to play with, because he definitely feature more.
Right.
Like, and I don't think that everything it won't necessarily mean that they won't vote for the Labour Party if I do a satirical Starmer cartoon. I think also if they thought I was campaigning with my work, they'd be less interested in it as well. So I think you do need to be balanced.
Yeah.
Like I don't want everyone deserves to have an angle on them. I think that's
probably true. I had my satirical column in The Guardian. I was a Labour candidate in that general election, standing against Theresa May in Maidenhead, knowing I would lose, but I was sort of doing it for fun, really. It was such a happy time, the 2001 election. It was before 9/11, it was before Iraq, and it was like we knew Labour was going for another landslide, and I thought, I won't deliver leaflets this time. I'll be a candidate in my hometown. I'll go back and be rejected en masse by the people I grew up with. And I was, but Theresa May was just like shadow education back then, and I was just having a laugh. But I was also writing a column in The Guardian every week about it and doing a documentary on BBC Two. So they're very indulgent of them to let me be a columnist and be a partisan candidate. I suppose it's like you say, it's the politics of the paper.
It sounds like you've got more qualms about the two, because I don't think I've ever thought about going into politics.
Right.
Ever. Not yet.
No.
I'm not. Where it's like, but I guess some of your work, you are very pro-Labour, and you have worked with and for the Labour Party.
Yes.
So I feel like there's more closeness between that and your satirical side.
I suppose what I'm voicing is that it's not ideal to be like me. I think you're in a better position. Someone who goes, my broad philosophical view is this, and I will try to express that through my cartoons. There's no way that you're going, oh, I'm between, Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper, I think you vote this. You're not going to get into the details of that.
The philosophical, I definitely have, the philosophical thing is definitely true. I definitely have
What view?
Yeah, for sure. But I think interfaces maybe that. My graphic novel in it is because it's detached from real politics, party politics, I don't think ever really represents what I'm trying to say. It's just too fiddly, it's too specific. I never feel like they're talking about the important questions.
Yes.
Whereas in a way, by making it an abstract sci-fi that isn't held down by that, I'm trying to talk about inequality, gender, technology, the environment, these overarching ideas that actually it's not going to be tomorrow's news because it's this year's news, and actually the book has let me take a step back from the topical work and try and think about how it ties together.
Yes.
And these themes that they go through it but never seem quite relevant enough for the Guardian on Monday, they're the ones that I want to have time to develop, not in one panel, but turn the page and make it nuanced and make it complicated and show how they intersect.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating, and there's so much in there. Do you sometimes worry that you try and put too much in? Yeah. I did talk to you about a controlling idea, and
But I think if I was what is this book about? It's how do we connect? How do people connect?
Yes.
And then there's a lot of other stuff as well.
That's okay.
But I think it's that's the structure of the book always feeds that as the idea.
Yeah.
And I think obviously I think it's important, as you say, to try and focus. Sometimes I'm a bit it's just scattering.
Yeah.
There's something about graphic novels as well, which is fragmented. It's now it's all separate little bits, and then sometimes when they're do they actually all click together at all? Well, so that's a bit scary because that's an environment panel, that's are they going to feed anyway?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
But I mean, in a film you'll get that. You'll have a moment where there's a montage or a song, or there might be a long build-up, or there might be a short cut of series of scenes. There'll be subplots, and that's all fine as long as it's all towards a general idea and story, and it all feeds into a sort of satisfying conclusion. And that's more interesting if you've got lots of ideas. It's just sometimes it's tempting to put all your ideas into every idea, and there are things that you just have to take out sometimes, I've found. Yeah.
But not when I've just finished drawing. It's that's the editing is when I have to leave it, and then when it's less precious, then I can actually see if that's actually not just beautiful, because I know it kind of will be beautiful, but is it actually saying something, and is it feeding something else?
Yes.
You have to totally turn off the visual side and be there's a meaning here.
Yeah. And so do you have an idea for your next graphic novel after this?
I'm trying not to think about it, because I think we're so far away that I actually want to not have my head tied. I think I've said, by the end of this book, I'll have said everything that I feel I should say, and I need to live a bit more. I feel I need a few more years of life and experience, and then maybe I've got a lot of projects that are more short form.
Yeah.
Because I think there is something it's not heavy, but I'm just
it's exhausting.
It's just this big unwieldy thing, but there's something refreshing about the political deadlines, and it's blank page, get it done, in the type 2 bin, start again. Yeah, there's that. But there are some projects that are more about, I've done a lot of work with Doctors Without Borders, the medical aid charity, and those projects that are about really connecting, so I go to their field hospitals and spend time sketching their staff and patients and trying to represent their stories, and those projects that actually get you to connect to the real world. This book is so much in my head, whereas I think after it I want to do a little bit more that is actually... Those
are amazing, those cartoons. If you check out Ella's website and have a look at those Doctors Without Borders pictures, have you got any of them to hand there? Otherwise,
that's from South Sudan.
So you went out there?
Yeah, so this is a sketch done in person of this family, and then I built these sketches into these comic pages. And this was actually the very, very earliest seed of the book. It sounds hard to say, but I sort of went there, as I said, the desire to tell other people's stories, and was just confronted by how far away their lives were from mine, and this it was just slight existential crisis about whether I had a right to their stories, and whether there was anything I could do that could possibly represent them, and whether that meant that I shouldn't try. So in the end, I was you've been paid to do this, and the point of it is to raise awareness of these issues, and something is better than nothing, so just try. And the way that I felt was the most authentic was not to pretend that it was actually real, but to show very clearly the kind of cracks in the story. So here you can see that at the bottom, that's me there with talking to them and drawing them and interviewing them, and then above is like the imaginative visualization of their story. So I wanted to show very clearly that it's like this is me trying to understand them, and it's this gap between these two, my perspective and their perspectives. That's kind of what the book is about, because this balancing of these two perspectives becomes a really important theme later on in with the two sides of the book.
Right. And these are for sale, aren't they? These things on your website.
And my friends.
So do go on and buy them, they're amazing. I feel like we've covered quite a lot there, and I think people are probably interested in asking some questions. Any questions burning from the audience? And anyone who says this isn't so much a question as an observation, I will pull a lever and you'll fall through the floor. Any questions from anyone? Don't be shy about anything we've talked about. It could be Ella's work, my work, how to get wax out of a carpet. We've got answers for it. Someone will be the brave person. That's the first one. The lady there.
I imagine you probably don't need that much more to think about when you're busily drawing a cartoon in that compressed time, but do you ever wonder if in 20 or 30 years' time there'll be school kids at school studying your pictures and what they might think of it?
That would be very distracting. I do remember, in history GCSEs, looking at people's political cartoons. I remember, David Lowe, some particular ones, and I do think about a responsibility of being part of recording history sometimes, particularly when a big event happens and I'm on shift. Like when Russell, maybe it's not big yet, but when Russell Brand, that story happened, and I was like, this is my story, and I'm happy that, I'm proud that I happen to be female, very unusual political cartoonist, and also happen to be on shift. And I didn't draw that cartoon because I was a woman, I just happened to be there because I draw regularly for The Guardian, and I'm like, oh, this is good that I have this opportunity to take this tiny moment of history and do justice to it in some way. And sometimes sometimes big things will happen, and I get this sense of just scale a little bit, part of the narrative maybe.
I got my daughter's friend was doing politics, and she was doing my first book, Things Going to Get Better, in her studies, and she started quizzing me. I go, I don't know, and the other friend was going, I know the answer to that one, and they knew the book better than I did. So I'm actually old enough that my first book is now studied in history GCSE, which is amazing. But I hadn't thought about what you just said there about being a rare thing to be a female political cartoonist. Is that tricky sometimes?
Yeah. I try not to talk about it too much because I want to be a cartoonist, not a female cartoonist. And so many people will be like, what's your opinion as a female cartoonist, which is not what you've done. But I think
it's a very male world, isn't it?
It's exclusively male world. If I think about my colleague, there's one other woman who works on a national paper apart from me.
Right.
And I think it's not, people think it's sexism. I think it's latent sexism, and it's purely about the fact that all those people who have those jobs got those jobs when 20 years ago, when women didn't do journalism and they didn't do comedy and they didn't do art. So they did, obviously, but it was a little bit harder. So I think it's that, and because they've been there for so long, it's really hard for new people to come in, and because of the print journalism just contracting, all the new opportunities that would have allowed new people in, and particularly women, just haven't happened.
Yes.
So it's that. I think I feel sometimes I want to. I remember how when I started, I was only getting commissions about women's issues, and that was extremely. It was unfortunate that it was also Me Too times. So there was a lot of stories about sexual assault, and those are really hard to illustrate photographically because not very photographic. But obviously, the editors wanted visual references, and I happened to be a female illustrator, so I ended up in this kind of unfortunate niche of just drawing a lot of things about sexual assault, and it was just sort of I did it because I felt like I was being pigeonholed into a speciality that I was quite good at because I'd done quite a lot of it, and I was obviously interested in it, and I felt like I maybe would do it better than my male colleagues. But also I wanted to do politics. I think that's the thing. It's I feel really happy that I'm employed by The Guardian and The Times sometimes to do politics, and then if something like Russell Brand is this particular story that women in particular I might have a particular insight on, then I want to do that particularly well, but not at the expense of doing everything else.
No, sure,
really.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting talking about Theresa May. She was shadow education. The women politicians always got education. Margaret Thatcher was education. They would never have a female Minister of Defence. They'd never have Rachel Reach is the first female Shadow Chancellor because it's the money, it's important. So it's still with us.
And it's true that I feel like everyone I draw men so much. Like if I default with a default body I draw in a hurry on a deadline has a suit, and then I have to be like, oh, it's a man. It is not a man. That's so depressing. But that is just the fact that Westminster is still so male dominated.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And the men that draw it reflect that, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I read a tweet on the way here from a female comedian who said, "Oh, one of my jokes I just used from 2018. He must be so proud he's finally been used. She went, why are my jokes male?" She was like, yeah, maybe it's just we will default to the male gender. Another question from somebody. There's one there. Yes.
Well, first of all, congratulations. I love your work. Second, I find the use of colour quite intriguing. How do you decide when to make a drawing in colour or black and white? And specifically, why your graphic novel is in black and white?
Yeah, good questions. In terms of newspapers, it's time. So I draw naturally in black and white, and then there's less colour because there's less time. That's changing a little bit now, just it's like style shift maybe. The book is, I think, stories maybe, because it's a story and text is black and white, and you're not meant to pause too long, and it would take a really long time to draw all colour. I feel quite comfortable with that. And also there's something about the dystopia of it as well, which I think works quite well in black and white. There are some tiny bits that I would kind of like colour in, which I will talk to my publishers at some point about. But I think I tend to want black and white, like sharp contrast, and then like tiny. So the colour should be like, it's got to have a meaning, not just filling a space. If that makes sense, it has to have like a mood almost with it.
So you talked about the criticism that comes with some things about like the Gaza thing and how it captures the moment. Has it ever been like the opposite way around? Like a few months later, you went back to something and gave it a new meaning, that in a good way, rather than that. So,
That's interesting. I
I
think
guess the joy question was.
I think it's that thing of like, you don't know how the world is going to, like, it sometimes things get out of sync and come back, or you look back at something and say, oh, I was actually right about that, that's actually exactly how things developed. And in terms of, like, I think I talked a lot about criticism, but I also get people who email me about things that like actually really resonated with them, and there's nothing that is more inspiring than that, because these, as I said, these things are not our lives, they're other people's, and like realizing that it resonates with people and having that response, like that is that's a kind of drive for future things as well. And it's always that thing of like most people who email you are the ones that want to complain, but there are lots of people who like it who don't complain. Right. It's important to remember that. I think the other thing that's tricky with cartoons is always when you just finish something, it always feels really fresh and you're like really close and sensitive to it and you just finished it. So it's quite painful, the fact that people can immediately get back to you about how much they hate it. It's like normally you have time to like develop that skin. The worst thing is if I'm doing back-to-back shifts, so I'll publish something and then I'll get this like slew of all the people who hate it, and then I'm there like trying to work out what to draw tomorrow. Like, okay.
So do you read all that stuff? Do you read the criticism?
I try not to.
No, I think that's probably wise.
I know.
Do you tweet them or Instagram them?
It's mostly below the line comments.
Oh, on the comments.
Yeah,
oh, God,
I know
those.
I know. But they're right there. And I'm like, don't look that.
Don't go there. Yeah, because we live in an age where opinion instant. So back in the day, you'd have to wait for points of view, or.
And by then you don't care anymore because you've like, moved on. But there's that set. It's literally like I finished it less than an hour ago, and there's that person who's already there like.
Yeah. No, it's too easy. It's too easy to immediately offer your opinion. I wanted to, before I ask more questions, I want to ask you about your work here and about the John Soane Museum and what they've provided for you and how that has worked for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really amazing. I think just firstly, the idea that like a place like this takes your work seriously has really helped me take my work seriously. I think one of the reasons I applied to this residency in the first place is because of this John Soane Museum's connection to Hogarth, and they have some of their Hogarth's original engravings and also Gillray's, and these are both cartoonists that are like my like key influences. Before like I really understood politics, like I loved Hogarth's Harlot's Progress and these sort of social issue cartoons which sometimes age better than politics, because you don't always know who the characters are, but the issues in those cartoons are still as relevant today as ever. So it was just really special to have the opportunity to go through those engravings, and I found like I'd seen them digitally, but like they're massive in real life, and actually being able to like appreciate that and the detail, and it's such an ancient profession, cartooning in a way, and it's weird how little it's changed, but it's also not. So it's just really interesting seeing like their arguments and their narratives and their kind of like satirical twists. So that was one thing that I spent a lot of time here like researching that, and the other side is the sort of the world building of the book, having an opportunity to like just exist in this incredible world, which is just like slightly outside of the real world.
Yes.
and like looking through those architectural drawings and using that to feed into the ones that I've done.
And Ella showed me the room in which she works upstairs, which is open on 2:30 on Saturday. I think it's in another day. But you have to go past a security guard, or past a little rope, and then people can see you up there. They can see you working. Is that difficult?
It depends what I'm working on. I think mostly it's just like I'm there, like, can you make some art now? I'm just not.
The pressure on you to produce art because you're in this great architectural space.
Yeah, I never really think of I don't think of myself as an artist. I think I'm a cartoonist.
Okay.
Because that feels manageable and like a profession, like something I can sit down in the morning to and get up in the evening from. Art is like more of that sort of. So I think this is interesting, trying to see how I think this space is art. So it's like it's different from my journalism side in a way.
Yes.
The shift in that has like made me think about a bit more about my work as art than as journalism,
Right.
which I think is interesting.
Anyone else? Will, you had your hand up right at the beginning. Have I covered what you were
Yeah, I was only going to ask about the relationship with Hogarth and him, because that is the great progress. In a way, it's a graphic novel, and how the atmosphere here affects your work. Do we see that in your drawings of the book?
I think there is some scenes of debauchery, urban debauchery, yeah, definitely, which there are definite links. And also the harlot's progress and the rake's progress and the parallels between them, and like how those two narratives work. I think those ideas definitely fed into the book in terms of these two parallel worlds. And I think it's also just like the depth of Hogarth's drawings, the fact that like they're not politicians, they're not reckoned, but each person's are like the caricatures and that kind of detail. Like I try to replicate that in my work as well. Some of his light as well, the way that he uses light. I think it's interesting because they're etchings and they work. Obviously I draw digitally, but I often draw like negative, so I'll draw like black and then put white lines on top, which is something that you can do digitally, and it's that as a way of like building the light into something, and it creates a particular like dystopian effect, I think sometimes, and it also you just creates that focus, and I think looking at some of those engravings have really helped with that.
Can I ask, do you ever work in hard copy? Do you ever put a piece of charcoal or ink on a piece of white paper?
Yeah, but only for myself. I think
Okay.
I used to draw. Drawing was my hobby, and now it's my job. And I wanted to keep a bit that is like not productive.
Okay.
So I do still sketch, mostly biro, like cross-hatch biro, which is like, that's just. But I think that's something that is just.
That's interesting. I remember going around to Nick Park's house once, the sort of genius behind Wallace and Gromit and all that, and he had these watercolours of garden birds he was doing, and that was his hobby. And I thought that's so sweet that he is this brilliant artist, but he also just loves to do watercolours of little blackbirds and robins.
That was probably the thing that gave him the most joy.
Maybe. We've got to we're nearly up to time. One last question, if anyone's got one, otherwise I'll ask it one. Anyone burning to ask something that hasn't been said? Okay. We'll wrap up. There's drinks upstairs. There's a chance to see some of her drawings, which are for sale, I believe, as well, if you are interested. And maybe Ella will sign them if you're lucky. But there'll be collector's items of immense value one day. So you were here at the beginning. I think we're all incredibly privileged to be here at the beginning of Ella's career. Her stuff leapt out at me when I first encountered her at the London Library, and I feel very lucky and grateful to have made this friendship. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you, Ella, for sharing that.
And can I just say thank you so much to Sir John Soane's Museum for everything, particularly Maria for all your help along the way. Like honestly, just to facilitate, it just made it feel very warm and made everything possible. And Fiona as well for this event, and Will as well for everything.
Thank you very much.
And for John, obviously.